misty and murky scene that has descended over downtown Wellington, part of the magnificent harbour setting for the 4th Nissan Mobil 500, round 10 of the World Touring Car Championship. Good afternoon. The finest field of drivers and cars ever assembled in New Zealand has gathered here in Wellington for the Nissan Mobil 500. The Ford Sierras, so dominant at Bathurst and at Calder, are not expected to have it quite as easy here in Wellington for the Nissan Mobil 500. They will suffer, I think, from the weather too. There's been plenty of rain here today. There was rain overnight, light rain this morning and showers on and off this afternoon. But about an hour and a half to 2 hours ago, the rain really set in. There's been some rather unpleasant conditions for the first unofficial practice, which has now finished. It was held earlier this afternoon. The second session set to go at around 4:30. Opposition too for the Ford Sierra is expected to come from the powerful Commodore team and the BMWs. Over the next half hour, we'll meet the drivers and look at the cars that will provide the drama and excitement over the next 2 days. We'll be soaking up the atmosphere of the Group A unofficial practice. We'll also look at the circuit, which almost overnight has been transformed from an easy city drive to a twisting, turning circuit, demanding patience and concentration. It also demands car reliability, something the Commodores can provide. They've been effective at Wellington before and can be expected to mount a powerful challenge.
Looking for a waterfront hat trick, Peter Brock this time partnered by David Parsons in number 5. The second HTT entry, the backup for Brock, is David Oxton and Neil Crompton, both commentators for us this weekend. Australian Larry Perkins and Kiwi Denny Holm crew the Casio Commodore, a good chance here. The two Kiwi team in the Can-Am Commodore, Aucklanders Wayne Wilkinson and Graham Cameron. Hot off the press, a last-minute entry. Just arrived, the very talented pairing of Oz Alan Grice and England's Wyn Percy.
Led by two-time Nissan Mobil 500 winner Peter Brock. Well, the BMWs, though in the 2.5 litre class, are also expected to provide strong opposition. They've talented driver combinations and they should be very quick, particularly through the faster corners.
Car number 40 sees Roland Ratzenberger and Marcus Osterreich lining up with the first of the Works BMW M3s. Alfred Hagar and Tony Longhurst in car number 41, the second of these cars. 42 sees former world motorcycle champion Johnny Cecotto from Venezuela and Gianfranco Brancatelli. Olivier Griard and Winnie Voigt, the 87 European champion in car number 43. New Zealand's Paul Radisich, much travelled, joins Ludwig Finnar, a former BMW mechanic, in car number 44. Roberto Ravaglia, the 1986 European champion, and Emmanuel Pirro, a Roman, join forces in car number 46, the lead BMW. 47 is to the girls, Mercedes Sturmitz and Annette Moiversen in another M3 BMW. Car number 48, Graham Lorimer and John Sachs in yet another of the M3s. 53 sees gentleman Jim Richards and the Australian touring car champion and Trevor Crowe. 55, Ed Lamont and John Morton in the second of just two 325i's in the field. And the final M3 BMW, car number 62, Baron Thomas von Lois and Prince Leopold von Bern.
Cars with turbo power are expected to start favourites for Monday's 4-hour race. The Ford Sierras have improved their reliability. The European Eggenberger team have flown out special stronger gearboxes and rear axles from West Germany. While winning easily in Australia, there is the feeling that the Ford Sierras will come up against the tighter Wellington circuit and the bumpy nature of the circuit as well, and that's not going to work too well for them. Let's look now at the Ford Sierras, the Nissan Skylines and the Volvos, the cars with turbo power.
12 turbos make up the field for the fourth Nissan Mobil 500. Number 4 car per Gunnar Anderson and Iki Tolik, and of course Dick Blomqvist and Ulf Granbergen, the second of the Ubix copyists, 240 turbos. Young Glenn Seaton and John Bow in the number 15 Peter Jackson Nissan Skyline from Australia. And of course they'll be given strong support by farmer George Fury and Terry Shield of Sydney in the second of the PJ Nissan turbos. Car number 24, Graham Crosby and Gary Sprague driving the Sleepyhead Nissan Turbo Skyline. Ken Bagent and Graham Bowkett in the number 25 Skyline. They've done so well in Australia this year. For real clout, Steve Soper and Pierre Dieudonné and the number 6 Rudy Eggenberger, Texaco Sierra. They're on a roll at the moment. And Klaus Ludwig and Klaus Niedzwitz, who have done so well in Australia, will drive the number 7 Texaco Special. Number 17 from Australia, Tricky Dicky Johnson from Queensland, and former motorcycle ace, Greg Hansford. And their second car, the Kiwis, Neville Crichton and Neil Lowe. And from Australia, Andrew Madecki and Phil Myra in the number 35 car. One to watch in the Nissan Mobil 500.
So that's a preview of some of the cars providing the action on the Nissan Mobil 500 this weekend. For some early predictions on the cars likely to go the distance and the drivers who are going to take them there, let's join our commentary team.
We have an excellent field of cars here with a big contingent from Europe, a lot of Australians and of course top New Zealanders. And we have commentators to cope with all those different parts of the world. Our European expert is Richard Hay. What do you think of the Europeans' hopes here? Or are they hopes, or is it a case of who can catch them?
Well, I think the main thing about the Europeans is that they're all professional drivers. They're coming to a circuit like this is no different to them going to France or Germany for the weekend. It's more or less the same as any other race, except of course it takes place on a street. I think you've got to look out for the Sierras in particular. The Sierras will be very quick. The BMW M3s, of which there are 6 works machines here. And Win Percy and the Commodore, the one thing about a street circuit, and in particular this one, all the drivers reckon it's going to be a great leveler and that all the cars will be more or less equal, so we could be in for a cracking race, I think.
There's a European view from Richard Hay, and you'll hear a lot more from him during the course of the weekend and our commentary team. Also joining us, our Channel 7 colleague, Mike Raymond. And what about the Australians here?
Well, there's 23 of them here for the 4th running of the Nissan Mobil 500. I guess Peter Brock has won the race for the past 2 years, and I would still have Peter Brock as one of the pre-race favourites. I thought George Fury and Glenn Seaton were very unfortunate last year. They were the pace setters. They led the race until the first set of pit stops, and then everything turned to mire for them then. You know, the Europeans will start favourites, but good old Brock logic around here with a very heavy car and able to dance around in the wet. I still think Brock's in there for top 3.
Mike Raymond being suitably patriotic about the Australian chances. Well, what about the New Zealanders? We're joined in the commentary team by 2 top drivers. Robbie Francevic, what do you think of the New Zealanders' chances?
Well, goodness, we're in New Zealand and they've got to have a chance. And really looking at the team, that's the real New Zealand team, it's got to be the Nissan team. They've campaigned in Australia and they've got a good show here.
Any others?
Yeah, well, all the others are support drivers, of course, but, you know, they're in some good teams, so I think the New Zealanders will go real well.
Those thoughts from Robbie Francevic. Also joining us is David Oxton, and perhaps you could explain to us the role of a support driver, since you're likely to be one for the weekend.
Well, the key is teamwork, Tony. I mean, 2 car setups, 2 cars, 2 drivers in each car, so your job is to make sure the team succeeds. And that's what all of us are there to do. We make sure the car is nice and tidy, kept on the pace, and if the team boss should want to use it, then so he can.
So you may have to step aside.
Well, we hope not. I'm sure Peter won't stick it in the wall, but if the car has a mechanical failure which slows its pace in any way, the other cars are there and hot for him.
The Wellington Street Circuit has gained a reputation as a real challenge for the best drivers in the world. It's certainly not a course for the out-and-out risk-taker. For a brief description of the 3.2-kilometre course, here's Tony Palmer.
Looking just very briefly at the way this circuit goes from the start-finish line up to a hairpin bend, out through the wharf gates, onto the main straight down the back, down Cable Street, a hard left-hander, then winding its way around through by the overseas terminal, a little kink, a chicane to slow it down, that through to a right-hander, and then the bridge, which is not a single lane anymore, it's been widened, and back along by pit lane to the start-finish line, 3.21 kilometres. Let's just look at what the course is like at the moment. We're not getting any kind of practice times that will give us any indication to the race, unless, of course, the race is wet also. Most of the top Group A cars out there at the moment and trying to contend with the wet weather. Most of them have put intermediates or wet weather tyres on at the moment, and this, Mike Raymond, is not the kind of circuit you would want to do anything wrong in the weather.
There's an old Australian saying about put the wellies on for a wet race. Usually we have to wait until race day to get the mixed weather here in Wellington. I think, well, I hope anyway, Tony, that it's arrived just for practice, day 1.
Richard Hay, it's a trite thing to say, I suppose, that the Europeans are accustomed to the wet weather, but are there any particular Europeans who are specialist wet weather drivers?
Not really. Steve Soper is a wet weather specialist, but outside of him, they all tend to be very good all-rounders. That's why they're here. They're capable of driving in any conditions, any sort of circuit. People were saying beforehand that certain drivers might find it difficult to get used to the circuit. That isn't the case. If they can't get on the pace within 5 laps, then they shouldn't be here, and the Europeans are good at that. That's what they're paid to do.
Mike Raymond talking about wet weather specialists. I know there are one or two of them, the newest being Glenn Seaton via race cam at Bathurst. He surprised quite a few people, didn't he?
Yes, he certainly did. He's a star of the future, is young Glenn Seaton, and he's been getting around here very quick this afternoon in practice. At the moment, of course, we're following the Texaco Eggenberger Sierra, the black car on your screen at the moment.
The weather forecast tells us that it is unlikely to be a wet day for race day. We're hoping we'll get all the wet weather over before we get to race day. And we spoke to some of the leading contenders seeking their thoughts on this circuit.
Wellington is a tremendous event as far as physical exertion on the driver is concerned. There's no respite for the driver at all. And it's a great challenge to maintain the pace and keep the car on the circuit. It's very good.
It must be quite nice fun because you are around. Okay, it's tight circuits and narrow, but okay, it's the same for everybody. So, and the public are there and everything. So you are in the middle of everything driving. So you don't have to move people around so much.
I have a little experience in Monaco. I was there in '77 with a Formula car, and I hope that helps me a little bit here. You've got to watch those curbs, don't you? I think it's a little bit dangerous to drive in a street circuit, and I was watching yesterday the circuit, and I think it's not easy to learn and it's not easy to win here.
Well, I think it's a different challenge, and the tightness of it is particularly a challenge, and it's somewhat dangerous on crashing cars because it's so narrow and it's so hard to pass, lap cars and even cars you're competing, with directly. So it's got its own sort of challenges, and it's very interesting.
I think it's excellent. It's extremely demanding on the drivers and extremely hard on the car, and you certainly have to pay attention, and the winner normally here deserves it because he follows all the things that you have to do to win the race.
I think it's pretty good. It's very different to any other circuit we've sort of used to.
I think it's very demanding for driver and car, actually. A lot of concentration. I think it's going to be probably a few car breakages and a few accidents. From a driver's point of view, a very difficult circuit.
I rate it dangerous, bumpy, twisty. It's fantastic. I love it. It's one of those races or one of those tracks with that extra degree of difficulty. And too often now you've got these simple, ordinary tracks that, hell, you can train a 10-year-old kid to drive around there fast. Here it's a challenge, and I hope it never changes. I hope it's always bumpy and twisty and tight and has that element of danger because that brings out the best in drivers.
Well, he's certainly going to enjoy this weekend, Peter Brock. Well, initial scepticism from most concerned greeted the announcement of a Group A streetcar race in Wellington. That was when it was run in 1985 on a somewhat Heath Robinson-ish circuit with a one-lane bridge. A high-quality field of cars blasted into New Zealand motorsport history. And Wellington turned on a sparkling summer weekend. The race exceeded all expectations. No one thought that the race was going to end as it did.
The shimmering waters of Wellington Harbour signalled a new era for New Zealand motorsport. Group A saloon car racing on a street circuit, Monaco Kiwi style in the summer of '85. A late and unheralded entry featuring in nobody's picks the Volvo 240 Turbo, flown in on race eve for Robbie Francevic and Michel Delcourt. The race was dominated by the big yellow 351 Falcon of Dickie Johnson and Bruce Anderson from the start. The early order was Johnson, Crichton and the ever-present Ocker, Peter Brock. In those days, the bridge was a single-lane panel basher, something no driver wanted to argue with. Johnson was on the limit, his and more particularly the cars. In hot pursuit were Crichton and Brock still. But before long, Queensland's master of the one-liner was out with a broken axle. Surprise, surprise, the red Swedish taxi was on the pace and fighting through a class field. Even the might of Tom Walkinshaw was being scorned by Francevic's flying brick. Moments later, Walkinshaw's Rover smoked to an early retirement. And the Volvo was being restrung with number 8 fencing wire to tame its bucking bonnet. The Bajent Low Beamer began a curb-bashing episode, shortening its race life. And John Morton in a similar car was gobbling up places fast. There were shocked Brock fans everywhere as the Volvo passed the famous 05. And John Morton looked good until a worn gearbox, tyres and driver combined to spin the German coupe twice in the space of a few laps. By now, the Volvo surprise was becoming a Swedish swashbuckler with a victory just minutes away for Kiwi Robbie Francevic and Frenchman Michel Delcourt in a car that barely made the last practice session and started behind the field. Morton and Sittner were second and Crichton and Wilkinson third.
Robbie Francevic, happy memories from 1985. Did that race go to plan for you?
Oh, it sure was good memories, but, you know, you always expect to win, but I certainly did in 85, and it was a great win.
How has the race changed since then?
Well, you know, like, that race should have really never got going, but it did, and it was a credit to everyone concerned, and 3 years later, it's, you know, a major international event.
All right, who do you see as the big threats?
Well, obviously, every race has favourites, and the Sierras have to be the favourites. Eggenberger's won the last two, but if anyone's got a chance of beating him, it's going to be here on Wellington, the tight track.
All right, Robbie, thanks very much. We'll be hearing more from you through the race. Robbie's part of our commentary team. We'll be back after this commercial break with more thoughts from the drivers for the 1987 event.
Something.
We have to win. I have to win with my teammate Klaus Ludwig because I'm still the leader in the World Championship. We have the most points, and the important thing for us is to get all the points to win the championship.
Well, I still think that the Sierras are going to be the cars to beat. And I think it's going to be very close between the Nissans, the Commodores, the BMWs and the Volvo. So it's going to be a very interesting weekend.
There's no way the winner is going to be someone who, you know, meanders around. We've got to press on here. All these overseas blokes are press on merchants.
Can you get by those Sierras?
Well, I must accept the fact that they're very quick, and but they still can be beaten.
Be tougher this time, although every time I've come here I always know it's going to be a tough race, but the European contingent of course are got their act together. They're very fast and it's going to be a hell of a race.
Well, we finished second last year in a Holden. I really believe that if a Sierra is running at the end, it'll be in the front by a long way. I would say a Texaco Ford first. Hopefully it'll be us, but if it's not, then the two Germans.
Yeah, you can never say how you finish, of course, but in Calder, our last race in Australia, we finished at the 7th, and perhaps we can also finish under the best 10s, we hope.
Quietly confident of a top 3 or 4 finish.
I still think that ABMW probably is going to be the car that's going to be ahead at the end of the race.
Who would have a holiday in Wellington in this sort of weather? It's a long weekend, and boy, it is hosing down here. It's miserable in the pits as the drivers prepare their cars for this weekend of racing. And looking over at Klaus Ludwig, the partner of Klaus Niederwitz, who's out in the racetrack now testing his car, and Klaus Ludwig back here in the pits, and he's not looking too happy because of this weather that we've got down here. With him, Steve Soper alongside him, and the two of them looking at tactics. I was talking to the drivers, and they were saying that there is benefit in weather like this, although you may not think so. It gives them a chance to look at the car, the sort of tyres they need. It looks the sort of setting up that you need for a car. And earlier today, Tony Palmer spoke to David Oxton about setting up a car and what that means.
On a day like today of unofficial practice, you'll hear many drivers talking about setting up the car. What they're talking about is setting up the car itself and the way it handles. David Oxton, you could explain to us what the things are that they do.
It's all compromise, Tony. What we're trying to do is make this car suit this circuit. We're doing that with the chassis, with the springs and with the shock absorbers, with the tyres and the wheels. And of course what we're trying to do is make this lovely big slick tyre stick to the ground and give the most power out of the corners to grip. We do that by swapping springs around. This is a heavy one, a light one. It makes the car ride differently. Used in conjunction with the shock absorber, the right weighting, the right poundage, That makes this tyre work well. Then finally we get the alignment right, and that is this movement of the wheel when we set the car up. The inward movement on there is camber, the outward and inward is toe in and toe out. Various adjustments like that all make the car work on the circuit.
You can also adjust the bias of the brakes from pressure on front and rear.
We need to have a lot of front brake on a circuit like this, but we have the adjustment on the track, on the dashboard, to give us that range, a little bit more on the front or a little bit more on the rear. It stops the brakes locking as we choose.
What about something as simple as the seat you sit in? Two different drivers, two sizes.
Comfort, very, very important here. Driver fatigue can be a problem, so the seat has to retain you well, has a 6-point harness, and it must hold you really tightly in place.
This race is the penultimate round in the World Touring Car Championship. In fact, victory for the West Germans Klaus Ludwig and Klaus Niedzwitz would just about wrap up the title for them. But it's a championship that's been dogged by controversy. It began in chaotic fashion, and with a backgrounder on the progress of the championship, here's Trish Strafford.
The Nissan Mobil 500. Once a year transforms Wellington into the Monaco of the South Pacific. From humble beginnings in 1985, the Group A race around Wellington's waterfront has grown up. It's now regarded as one of the top 3 races in the world, along with Bathurst and Spa. Wellington cracked the big time when it became round 10 of this year's inaugural World Touring Car Championship. For the first time, the major works teams are here, bringing with them top drivers and backup crews in the world. Wellington owes its new status to its uniqueness, street racing right on the harbour, and its difficulty. The course demands total driver concentration. Then, the bombshell. Not even a year old, the World Touring Car Championship was scrapped. Wellington will now play a part of a unique, strange year in world motor racing history. FISA, the world controlling body of motorsports, replaced Group A with a silhouette formula. That salute car bodies with sophisticated Formula One type engines and space frames. Very expensive versions of these. And it's a formula that local privateers won't be able to afford.
No one really knows the proposal of silhouettes yet, but no one can afford it here, neither here nor Australia.
Do you believe that this is a concentrated campaign to end motorsport in this part of the world? I mean, we've lost the New Zealand Rally, and there's the rumour that the Adelaide Grand Prix is going.
No, I don't think it's a conscientious thing to stop motorsport in this. It's just that the Europeans don't care about motorsport in this part of the world. They couldn't care less. And likewise, the manufacturers, their main point of the market is Europe and the United States. There's only 18 million people down here in Australia and New Zealand, so they don't care.
It's not just the fans and organisers who are disappointed. Wellington offers drivers a unique challenge. The twisting, unforgiving circuit requires an extraordinary number of gear changes. It's a tortuous exercise in concentration. There are no run-offs, no time to relax. Only 14 of the 43 cars that started last year finished.
Well, I like the circuit because it's difficult. It is a difficult circuit. It's difficult to keep a motor car together for its duration, and it's hard on motor cars. But it's satisfying, therefore, if you do a good job on it. As far as the World Championship is concerned, it's difficult to find the appropriate words without giving the censor a terrible problem. But I think it's like it's unbelievable act for somebody as far away as Paris to make a decision on the future of touring cars in the world when that person's whole life and expertise has been around Formula One motor cars. The Formula One scene, with the huge budgets they have and the different regulations they have, is a totally different scene to world touring car racing, and yet those are the people that make these decisions that are affecting so many drivers, teams, mechanics, so many people that are employed. You know, how much longer will they be employed under those rules of theirs?
In my opinion, there's not a lot wrong with Group A. Silhouette I don't really know enough about. Can't talk about Silhouette too much, but I'm very, very disappointed that Group A is being phased out as a World Series. Obviously, we will still have the European Series, but it'd be nice to come back to New Zealand and Australia.
I think it's very bad because what motorsports needs is stability in the ruling. Whatever formula you choose, it doesn't matter that much because you'll never reach perfection in a technical game like that. But I think you have to decide, you go for one formula, and then you need stability for many years.
So is there a future for the Wellington waterfront spectacle? The January race is definitely off. And after spending $160,000 this year alone on upgrading the circuit and the streets, the organisers are determined they'll be salvaging something out of the fiasco.
This race has grown each year to now be part of the World Championship, which is great. And so it's, we're obviously looking to build on that and to extend the level of racing here. We certainly don't want to go backwards, and so an international touring car series in the South Pacific incorporating the States is an obvious step to go. But there's a lot of work to do yet, and it just takes time.
How optimistic are you?
Well, FISA have already said that there will be a championship down here. It really depends whether we can perhaps reach an agreement with them to market it and put it together. And that's really where it's at. Initially we were looking at a series which was outside FISA and as a series rather than a championship. But they have announced that there will be a championship. We want to extend it so it takes in Macau and maybe the States and Hawaii. But it's a very political thing, so it's a bit early to say.
So this will be Group A rather than Silhouette?
Right, 88 will definitely be Group A. And it's quite possible that, you know, Group A will run alongside the Silhouette formula. So you could have the two running. And some of the manufacturers are quite prepared to do that.
The Nissan Mobil 500 has changed the face of motor racing in New Zealand. But it'll be the last time it'll be part of the World Touring Car Championship. Silhouette casts its shadow in 1989. Promoters will now be working furiously to get a 1988 Group A series sanctioned. The most likely projection for Group A in 1989 is a European and Oceania series. So 1987 could be the only time New Zealand will see the top European works teams in action.
Well, Mike Raymond, there's an enormous amount of bad news there and nasty things being said about the demise of the World Touring Car Championship in its inaugural year. Do we actually need a World Touring Car Championship, or can Australia and New Zealand anyway survive with what they have that works now?
I think, Tony, they've been able to survive for 20 years without a World Touring Car Championship. The people who are treating the World Touring Car Championship seriously, probably 6 BMW drivers and 4 Texaco Eggenberger Sierra chauffeurs as well. FISA has made a terrible mistake. But one would expect that from Bernie Eccleston, who hasn't been able to get total control of touring car racing around the world. He's met with remarkable resistance from New Zealand and Australia, who will not commit their category to one man. And after running it for one season, he's cast it aside, it's finished, and he's getting on with his next toy.
Richard Hay, you've been involved since the start of this World Touring Car Series in Europe. How has it looked there? Does it supersede the European Touring Car Championship? Is it bigger and better? And do we need, in fact, one overall World Championship?
It doesn't supersede the European Touring Car Championship. It was planned to, it never did. That was partly due to the fact that they started trying to charge ridiculous amounts of money for entry fees and so on, and it was impossible for the teams to come along. But I think it's very wrong. A lot of people have said that Group A is dead. It's not dead. There are manufacturers building new cars all over the world. There's a new Nissan due to be debuted in a few weeks' time. The same thing applies to the Toyota Supra that's just come out. Group A is not dead, and it's going to go from strength to strength, I think, just in European standards and in the South Pacific standards as well. You'll have championships out here for Group A cars. Group A cannot die.
I guess it remains to be seen what will happen, but without any doubt at all, Group A or touring cars, whichever format they're in, will continue to be very strong in Australia and in New Zealand. Let's go down now to the pits and have a word where Richard Hay is with Steve Soper.
The World Touring Car Championship so far this year has seen one car dominate, particularly over the last few rounds. And the man at the wheel of that car for the last 2 rounds has been Steve Soper. Steve, the World Touring Car Championship, first of all, can you win it now?
Yes, it's possible. We're obviously in the worst place. We're third in the points. Revalio is ahead of us, and both my teammates, Klaus Ludwig and Klaus Niedzwitz, are ahead of us. So we've got more work to do, and obviously, as a team point of view, it's better to push the people with the most points, which are the 2 German drivers, rather than us. But yes, it is possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible.
What would it mean to you, winning the championship?
It would be a very big ambition to be a world champion of a touring car, and obviously it means an awful lot, but I won't jeopardise my own ego for, you know, the main reason we're employed is just Ford works drive as a team, and we've got to work as a team to win the championship.
So the thing is then for the Germans, Klaus Ludwig and Klaus Niedwitz, the teammates in car number 7, the main objective is for Ford to win the championship.
Yeah, it's not a personal sort of ego like you got in Formula Ones, where it's Nelson v Mansell or something like this. It is, you know, basically if we all disobey orders throughout the year, then we don't get another contract next year.
All right, the weather is hardly matching the spectacle that we have here in Wellington this afternoon, but I should point out the forecast for Wellington is much better. Cloud clearing, light winds, and most significantly, no rain. That brings us to the end of this particular part of our preview. We'll be back at 5:25 with a report on the official practice that's on now. Thank you. Conditions. Qualifying practice is tomorrow, and I'm sure that the drivers are absolutely delighted about that, and we'll be hoping for much better conditions than we've had today. We go now live to our commentators.
Thank you, Jeff. And having joined us in the commentary box just a few moments ago, David Oxton, you've been out there. I wonder if the drivers will have achieved what they intended to achieve out there this afternoon, or have they just achieved enough for a wet setup?
That's it, Tony. As long as the race was wet on Monday, the boys would be well prepared. But of course, the young and the brave, the Glenn Seatons and the Tony Longhurst, they've been really flying.
Let's have a look. One of the people who fell foul of the weather, which has been pouring down the last hour and a half or so, Dick Johnson, had a little incident in the Sierra. Familiar number, and that's as simply as it happens. David Oxton, I guess that's just the way it is in the wet. You can't predict what kind of surface you're going to get.
It's really tricky there at the moment, Tony. There's a big sheet of water which is in effect like driving on glass. Maybe Dick just didn't have the brake balance quite right, just got a little bit offline, and things really start happening quickly in that rain.
Looking at Alan Grice out there around and circulating, was very much a late entry. It was thought that he wasn't coming until a day or so ago, but he and Win Percy have turned up, and they really must rate a chance. It's Win Percy in the car at the moment, Alan Grice back in the pits. Mike Raymond, I know we've talked a lot about whether or not it will be a wet race and whether that equalises things. I wonder who you'd pick if it was an all-day wet race.
Oh, you'd like to ask the easy ones, Tony. The real reason you see that Dick Johnson clipped the wall is it doesn't rain in Queensland. That's about his biggest problem. He would do very little wet racing. I don't know. Underneath all this, I know everyone's going for the Texaco Sierras and the BMWs. I still think that Peter Brock's done it pretty well here over the last couple of years, and if he can stay on the pace with them, he'll be around at the finish.
Robbie Francevic, would you agree that it's likely to be a little more...
No one likes to see drivers get hurt, and fortunately these days the safety features in the cars are such that it minimises the risk. In fact, motor racing is relatively injury-free compared to most sporting codes. But when things do get out of hand on the track, it does provide for some spectacular action.
those are the sort of things that we hate to see, and safety of a driver is something that's always uppermost in our minds. Trevor Crow, with your car, how well protected are you in there?
Oh, these cars now are getting very strong. They're very well built and they have a very good roll cage, which I'll show you here. This is part of the cage and it goes right around the whole car. We have a very good seat belt and a very strong seat, so we're very well cocooned in the car so that if it goes end for end or rolls over, we stay in that little safety area and the car's held together by the cage.
Tell me, Trevor, one of the real dangers is fire. How do you deal with fire? Have you got any special protection for things like that with your overalls and what have you?
Yes, for these World Championship rounds we must wear a double layer racing overall. And there's a very strong and very good fuel tank in the car that has a foam filling so that if the fuel tank ruptures, the fuel doesn't go out in a hurry. It can only dribble out, controls the fire. There's very good safety equipment on the car. We have 2 big fire extinguishers that we can use ourselves or the marshals can use. All around these circuits there's marshals at every corner with a lot of fire extinguishers, so we're pretty right.
Trevor, let's hope you don't need it this weekend.
Thank you.
Without wishing ill luck on anybody, Wellington certainly has a reputation as a car-breaking circuit. Let's talk to 2 of our co-commentators, both of whom are drivers. David Oxton, you've been out there. You said that it would only give a wet setup. What else do you think has been achieved this afternoon?
Well, I would say the discipline of the drivers is fantastic. I mean, there were team managers positively scared stiff of what their jockeys would be doing to those valuable little toys. And I would say the drivers have done a remarkable job of being sucked into hitting a wall. Some of the drivers have been setting up expressly for the wet. Some of the BMWs showing how well they can do this. Some of the bigger cars saying, sod it, let's leave it till tomorrow. It'll probably be dry, and that's when the real racing starts. We actually practice it today, qualify tomorrow, race Monday.
Robbie Francevic, having been out there and done a lot on this circuit, how do you think it would be? How would a driver feel at this stage looking at the weather?
Well, obviously he's going to think that it's going to be fine on Monday, but if I was out there, I'd be keen to get out there and do some laps. Practicing in the wet is really good for your nerves and for your reactions, so I think it's great to practice in the wet.
Certainly the BMW team are doing that in earnest. We'll give you both an opportunity here to pick a winner, assuming that everyone is picking Sierras in the dry. Who are you picking in the wet?
Well, obviously, I love the little M3 because I've driven it, and I think an M3 would be the obvious choice for me.
Dave Oxton?
Well, if I had to say anyone else other than Peter Brock, I'd probably get the sack.
Peter Oxton with the team loyalty, and both Robbie Francevic and David Oxton will be with the commentary team as time permits throughout the weekend.
And just before we go, a look at our coverage this weekend. We're back here at the Nissan Mobil 500 tomorrow after the tennis. That'll be at around 3:30 for coverage of the final qualifying practice. That's followed by the flying lap contest at 5. And coverage on Monday starts at 11, building up to the start at 1 o'clock. Let's hope the weather's better. On behalf of our commentary team, good evening.
About what kind of tyres to use. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Here we are, practice day 2 of the Nissan Mobil 500, the second Nissan Mobil 500 for 1987 round 10 of the World Touring Car Championship. The first official practice session has been completed. The cars were out on a dry track between 9:30 and 11 o'clock this morning, and they were able to post some pretty fast times, and not surprisingly, the winner of the last 2 rounds of the World Touring Car Championship, Steve Soper, posted the fastest time in the Ford Sierra Cosworth, the RS 500 Turbo, a time of 1:32.94. Klaus Niedzwitz, the second fastest, 1:33.67. A big crowd here at the Wellington waterfront on Sunday afternoon to watch the second day of practice. Of course, the highlight of today's program will be the Cannon Copiers Flying Lap competition scheduled for 5 o'clock this afternoon. Graham Crosby, one of the top New Zealand chances in the race, driving a Nissan Skyline Turbo, has joined me in the studio at this time. Well, Graham, we've had the first official times come in, and Steve Soper and Klaus Niedzwitz the fastest. Is that any surprise to you?
It's not a surprise, no. At this stage, they've posted some fairly quick times. The conditions this morning weren't exactly dry. They're a very, very cold track and continual very, very light drizzle, so nobody's really used any qualifiers. And if we're going to see some pretty quick times, I reckon the track, virtually now is the time to go out. The sun's come out a little bit, track's dry. and the times are going to be there.
Well, the historic cars are out at the moment, but the Group A's will be back on the track at 3 o'clock this afternoon. A 1:32.94 has been posted by Steve Soper so far. How quick do you expect them to get in the second official time session this afternoon?
I'm reckoning about a 28. That's going
really?
to be...
They'll get under 1:30?
Oh, definitely, yeah, I'm sure. When they put the qualifiers on, they'll be, you know, a fair few seconds off what they are at the moment. And the other thing, of course, is if they do put up a 28, have a look at the cut-off point. There's going to be a lot of disappointed guys out there.
What's your team been doing so far in the Nissan Skyline, the New Zealand, or Team Nissan New Zealand?
We set out yesterday's practice because it was just virtually impossible to do any settings, and today we went out and we qualified both cars, and we cross-qualified all the drivers to make sure that, you know, if anything happens, we've got enough drivers. We've set the car up just preliminary, you know, just on some new tyres, and ran around and put a reasonable time together, so, you know, we're looking forward to a good...
Graham, can you just tell us about this carry-on here? That's your car, obviously. What's the skier doing on top of it? There's not too much snow around here. I know we've had a lot of rain and almost some hail, but no snow as yet.
Well, you never know. This is Wellington. We've got Kent's actually taken the skier around. I understand he's going for some sort of record speed. But I forgot to tell Kent there's a few low bridges around here.
That in fact is Henry Van Ash, who's looking to do about 160 or be on top of a car doing 160 kilometres at top speed.
Well, he did enter practice yesterday and fell off at the end of the back straight there, put the brakes on, and one of his ski boots fell off. And of course Kent's seen this big pink thing appear in the window, and then a ski boot, and then a pole, and let's hope he does better this time.
All right, Graham Crosby, thank you very much. So Graham Crosby on the track this afternoon for the second time practice. Our live coverage from the Wellington waterfront will get underway after the tennis this afternoon, the final between Kelly Evenden and David Pate starting...
The brilliant little BMW M3 suits Wellington, but it's likely they'll lack torque. Roberto Ravaglia and Emmanuel Pirot is a superb combination. Ravaglia is the current European champ and goes into this event second on World Championship points, having scored a win, 3/3 and a 4th before crashing at Bathurst and finishing second at Calder. Fellow Italian Emmanuel Pirot is one of the bright young stars of international motor racing. This year he turned down Formula 3 and F3000 drives to drive the M3 so long as it didn't clash with Formula 1 dates. The gamble paid off, and it seems he's landed a seat in the big time. He's currently 4th on WTC points. This combination has no weak partner. An equally quick BMW M3 has another pair of top internationals in the driver's seat. Johnny Cicotto of Venezuela was twice a world motorcycle champion before switching to four wheels in 1980. After graduating from F2 to F1, a bad accident sidelined him for a year, making his comeback in 85, first for Schnitzer, then Volvo, now CBM. He won at Monza and Dijon this year, was 9th at Bathurst and 4th at Calder. When it comes to a street race, sheer grunt is handy, and you can't discount a Commodore V8. Peter Brock may have lost the official backing of Holden, but he still knows how to make them run on the pace and how to win in Wellington. At 42, Brock is the quintessential tactician of Australasian endurance racing, and even without Moffat and Harvey on his team, he can never be ignored, as his third-place finish at Bathurst just weeks ago proved.
Indeed, the king of Bathurst, Peter Perfect, and the Wizard of Wellington. This race has been run 3 times previous. He's won it twice, even though he's nearly 3 seconds down so far in qualifying times behind those Ford Sierra turbos. On a circuit such as this, car reliability, circuit knowledge, and above all, driver ability counts for so much. Remember, here in January, only 14 of 43 drivers, or 14 of 43 cars, managed to complete the course, complete the race after 4 hours. I suspect that Peter Brock is definitely going to be a factor in the race tomorrow afternoon, the race beginning at 1 o'clock. Well, it's practice day 2. Let's now join the European member of our commentary team, Richard Hay, to find out more about just exactly what the purpose of today's practice session is.
The Group A touring cars have had 2 days of qualifying here. The first day unofficial, which was wet yesterday, and today's practice session and the dry, which is the time session for the grid. But to ask Win Percy what it's really all in aid of, Win, why do you have all this practice?
Well, obviously it's very important to qualify a car in front of the grid as much as you can, as well as get used to the car, find out tyre wear, conditions of a circuit, etc. for the race itself. But here at Wellington, it's even more important to be up as far as you can in the grid, because it's such a tight twisting circuit. And obviously the first corner here, which is a hairpin, the farther away from the pack of cars you can be, the better it is.
The Group A touring cars don't go to a circuit like this anywhere else in the world. Does that cause you a problem with setting up the car for the race?
I wouldn't say it's causing a problem, but like any circuit, you have to get used to tyre wear, etc. Yesterday, as you mentioned, it was wet. And of course that set a few problems in as much as we couldn't gear the car correctly, we couldn't analyse tyre wear, brake wear, anything. This morning wasn't a lot better, so we're hoping this afternoon we can finally come to grips with our tyre patterns or whatever we want to use.
A lot of people have talked about qualifying tyres, and those are one of the things that are used to get a faster and faster lap. What are your feelings on the fact that some teams have thrown 10 sets of qualifying tyres at their car in order to get one fast lap?
Well, they're lucky to be able to afford it, I would think. I'm afraid we didn't this morning. We used race rubber really to do, as I say, to try and find out what we need for the race, when we could anyway. As you know, it was on and off rain all the time, so we couldn't really get a true analysis. If it is dry this afternoon, maybe we'll try a softer rubber and go for it. We'd obviously like to be in the top 10, but I think the race is more important than worrying about qualifying at this stage for us.
One major incident of the morning practice session involved car number 20. It's a Nissan Skyline Turbo, a private entry, and entered and driven this morning by Kieran Wills. It nudged a wall in the back part of the circuit and then really came to grief down at the hairpin. And John Cardwell later spoke to Kieran Wills about the incident.
Can you just tell me what happened in that incident?
Well, I came into the corner in normal position, normal speed, brake normally, got through the first part of the corner, and it wouldn't respond to the steering wheel. I just went straight and hit the wall virtually head on. Nothing I could do, just wouldn't turn, wouldn't respond. Something broke. At this stage we think it's a disc. The wheel's not broken, but the disc is broken inside it, and the caliper's fallen down and jammed the steering. But it's a bit early to say at this stage what caused it.
Can you repair the car and get out there and race?
We'll give it our best shot, but it's doubtful. With the Skyline being phased out and a new one for next year, there's not a lot of stock of parts left for them now, so we'll do our best. The Fred Gibson boys will give us anything they've got left at the end of their last practice session, so we'll do our best.
Just one of the early examples of how you can come to grief on the walls if you have any problem. As he said, there is no runoff here, and you can very easily be in trouble with extensive car damage. Well, the pits at any motor racing circuit are always a colourful place to be, and the place where the action is certainly on practice days. And this morning it was no exception here. Much talking, calculating, changing bits, repairing breakage, and of course worrying about the weather. But they all seemed very relaxed and happy nevertheless.
Today, all we've tried to do is make sure the drivers are qualified for this 110%.
Racing from